This is where atheists are taking us, to a world where ending life is the answer to every problem, a world where killing is always preferable to love and sacrifice. I've been reading this book lately. It is called Inside the Atheist Mind by Anthony DeStefano, and he has a really interesting chapter entitled The Death-Centeredness of Atheists. And I want to talk about it a little bit, talk about the dangers of living in an atheist-driven world, and while many claim not to be atheists, or they don't claim that title, many of us live practically atheistic lives, essentially living as if God doesn't exist. A lot of our societies are trending towards this, and in this book and in this chapter, he talks specifically about the extraordinary danger that is potentially in the pipeline down the road for cultures that have taken that approach and taken that stance, and how some of this danger is already here. If you want to get a copy of this book, I'll leave a link in the description. DeStefano talks about in this book how atheists are obsessed with death. Now, you wouldn't think that this would be the case because you'd think atheists don't believe in an afterlife, so they would be all about life, keeping us all alive as long as possible, as many of us alive as long as possible as they could. But no, actually, atheist thinking leads to an increase of death in our societies rather than a promotion of life in many cases. Jesus said that he came to bring life and to bring it more abundantly, and we are now facing his enemy that is bringing about death, and if it has its way, will bring it about much more abundantly. And what I mean by that is that for atheists, death has, in a lot of ways, become a cure-all solution to the problems of the world. And this, I think, is the natural end of the atheist logic, especially of the naturalist logic and the evolutionary logic. Instead of spending time and effort and energy and extending the virtues of love and compassion and care to people, what the atheist would rather do, and is already doing to a degree in our society, is just killing its problems, literally killing its problems. Some of these problems include unwanted or untimely babies. Probably know what I'm talking about. There have been roughly 1 billion abortions worldwide since 1960, so about 70 years ago, 65 years ago. Think about that, 1 billion, that's about 1/8 of the current world population. So from an atheist naturalistic perspective, the greatest virtue that you can strive for in your life is the maximization of your joy and your happiness and the success of your species. And if your species determines that there are some babies that are just unwanted, well, you just get rid of them. Rather than promoting life, you're promoting death to deal with a perceived problem. It's estimated that over 80% of women who receive a Down syndrome diagnosis before their baby is born abort their children, because those children would be considered to be a burden, something that people don't want to deal with. So snuff out that life, promote death to solve that problem before it ever comes into the world. Other countries use death to solve what they perceive to be an overpopulation problem. Some nations have had strict birth rate rules, and any babies that are born or conceived that would exceed whatever limit the government has placed on their citizens would be aborted, forced to be aborted. Kill to solve the problem. But this isn't a video particularly about abortion. That's one aspect of it, and a huge aspect of it that I think sometimes we forget is as serious as it is, because it's so commonplace in our society. But there are other forms of death that are being promoted by atheists and the atheist secular worldview that are employed to solve a perceived issue. One would be an old age and elderly problem, right? What is promoted to take care of some of these people who we have deemed to be a burden on society? They're no longer of value to our society, and so we think, we'll just kind of get rid of them. Well, euthanasia, which is becoming more popular all around the world in recent years, again, as societies have secularized, we have taken value off of human life and thought, well, we can make a determination when life begins and ends, and maybe we can even make that for other people who maybe aren't in their right mental capacities. You see what we're doing? Since we've taken God out of the equation, who's the giver and taker of life, now we've decided that we're the ones to make that decision. The power of life and death is in our hands, and, well, rather than having to exercise all of those virtues of patience and self-sacrifice to take care of some of these people, instead we'll just make it easy on ourselves and get rid of them. In some countries, especially in more liberal, secular European nations, there are also doctors and laws that have been passed that allow people to take their own lives for all kinds of reasons. Maybe they are ill. Maybe they're just depressed. Maybe their life just isn't really going the way that they wanted it to. And so they have the option in some places to go to a facility and to end their lives. And this is promoted and even advertised in some places. And I guess, again, from a naturalistic perspective, people don't see any intrinsic value in their lives or in the lives of others. And so just killing yourself, death, again, is the solution to an unfulfilled life. And there's also the issue of finances. Maybe this is a family's finances taking care of a sick person or an elderly person, but also, those old big pharma guys. You talk about insurance companies. There have been examples of insurance companies that have denied terminally ill people medicine to prolong their life and encourage them instead by saying, hey, we aren't going to continue this treatment and pay for that, but we will pay for some kind of end-of-life service that basically takes you off of our books. And if all you care about is making money and getting rid of your financial responsibility, well, then suggesting that someone should go die and end their life isn't a problem, especially if money is your god or you have no god at all and you just see humans as expendable. And DeStefano in his book points out three things that drive atheists towards these conclusions and why this is basically the necessary end of the naturalist worldview. He says the first reason is because since atheists don't believe in God, then they can't believe that there are real, eternal, objective values. So the only real sensible thing that they live for is to maximize pleasure or perhaps to maximize the success of the species. He writes this, therefore, the only sensible goals for human beings to strive after are worldly pleasures, conveniences, and the elimination of all suffering. And if someone or something stands in the way of the attainment of those objectives, well, it is perfectly acceptable and even praiseworthy to do whatever is necessary to eliminate that threat. The second reason is that since they don't believe in God, they can't believe in objective moral values, an objective moral law of what is right and what is wrong. And that basically makes them into God. They get to define and interpret what it means to be merciful to somebody, what it means to be a person, to have personhood, and what it means to kill or to murder someone. And they can also redefine those terms however they want to justify essentially whatever they want because they are their own God. The third thing that drives atheists towards this conclusion and this obsession with death as a cure-all to their problems is that they don't believe in God, and therefore they don't believe that human beings are made in the image of God. They think that that's absolute nonsense, and therefore human beings are just as expendable as perhaps any other animal or living being. On page 106, he writes this, human beings, they possess neither God-given immortal souls nor any kind of inherent or infinite dignity. Therefore, protecting their existence is not particularly important. Humans can be oppressed by cruel governments, murdered, aborted, and euthanized at any age and for any reason, as long as it serves some practical good. And of course, that practical good is defined by whoever is in power at that time. Sounds familiar, sounds like something I heard about back in the 1940s. If our goal is just to maximize pleasure and to support the human race genetically into the future, well, then any person who's maybe born with Down syndrome or any older person who has dementia or anyone who maybe even is depressed or suffering from some lesser mental illness, well, they kind of stand in the way of that goal. And so therefore, the society, a secular atheist society, can be lightning quick to essentially exterminate them if they don't meet up to the standards of what it means to add value to our society. He writes again on page 109, if a person's existence is deemed to be a threat to society, abortion, euthanasia, and other methods of killing can be justified for just about any reason at all, including helping to alleviate any problem. Overpopulation, immigration, poverty, homelessness, child abuse, and problems concerning race relations. And once again, let me remind you, who decides what is a problem that needs to be fixed through the extermination of certain human beings? Well, it's just whoever has the most power, whatever government is in control at that time, or whoever is able to force their will on other people. Sounds like a terrible society to live in, but this is where secularism gets you. So those are some of the problems that are creeping into our laws even today, but this type of thinking also leads eventually to essentially eugenics. Eugenics is the field of study of promoting desirable traits and genes within the human race and then trying to eliminate other traits and genes that would be considered negative or false to be carried forward in the human race. And this is scary stuff when it's put into practice. The Nazis in 1940, they were really into this. And this would include, when it's put into practice, things like restricted reproduction and forced abortions, forced terminations of pregnancies for people that are deemed undesirable. And once again, there's nothing to restrict this in the atheist worldview. There's nothing that holds scientists or governments back from implementing this if they declare this to be in the best interest of the people. Margaret Sanger, who was, by the way, the founder of Planned Parenthood, wrote in one of her books called The Pivot of Civilization. This is on page 110. She wrote that handicapped people, including blind, deaf, dumb, mute, insane, and epileptics, represented the, quote, dead weight of human waste. Now, I wouldn't want you to think that dear Aunt Margaret is not a merciful or was not a merciful woman. Yes, she offered options to these individuals who had what she defined as less ideal or bad genes. The two options that she offered were, number one, sterilization, or number two, segregation from society. Yes. And this woman, who is the founder of Planned Parenthood, you should look up what she thought about the black community and then ask yourself why Planned Parenthood has such a strong foothold in African American communities in the United States today, and whether or not she's actually succeeding at some of these horrible ideas and succeeding in putting some of these horrible ideas into practice in that community. She is definitely not a woman who was seeking the good of that type of a community. So anyway, that's a study for another time. Another thing that we are probably going to see coming down the pipeline if the secular mindset takes hold is post-birth killing of children. There was a guy who, a doctor, who was arguing to the British Medical Association. This is page 112. His name was John Harris. That really it's fine to kill a child after it's born because that child coming down the birth canal and being born really doesn't change it in any significant way from actually being in the womb. It doesn't have real personhood yet, and which of course he is the one who defines personhood. So he says it's fine to kill the child after it's born, as much as it is inside the womb. You see what they've done there. They've gotten us to accept the idea that an unborn child can be killed, and now they're just trying to push it one step further, saying, it's kind of the same. So if the baby's sick or has a problem or genetically is not typical, then it's fine for society, and they will say it is merciful to the child to just go ahead and bring about its death right then, and instead of waiting longer. And so this brings us back to the quote on page 113 that I started with. This is where the new atheists are taking us, to a world where ending life is the answer to every problem, a world where killing is always preferable to love and sacrifice. And let me ask, is this the world that you want to live in? I think the answer is no, but it is the logical end of a purely secular world. And this really shows us that Jesus knew what he was talking about when he promoted the virtues of love and self-sacrifice and loving your neighbor. It's these virtues being exercised in the world that keep us from becoming essentially merciless animals and just finishing off anyone in the world who doesn't fit our picture of what the world should be in our ideal world that we get to define because we've made ourselves our own gods. So thank God, literally, that he has been the promoter of these virtues on earth since the beginning. And that's why the world is at least a somewhat tolerable place to live in still. It's because he's instilled these moral principles into the hearts of men, and we definitely should not allow these foolish people that believe that God doesn't exist to rip these moral principles out of our consciousness so that they can implement the society of death.